The night it happened, no one was looking for drama. Fans were scrolling as usual, expecting the same familiar updates, the same recycled clips, the same nostalgic mentions of Meteor Garden. And then suddenly, everything changed. It started with something small, almost easy to miss. A brief appearance, a shared space, nothing officially announced. But within minutes, fans sensed it. That feeling that something unexpected had just happened, something that didn't fit the usual pattern. Wang and Shen Yue, two names that have never truly left each other's orbit in the eyes of fans. No matter how many years passed, no matter how many projects they did separately, those two names together always sparked something intense. But this time felt different. This time didn't feel planned. People who were there later described the moment as surreal. Dylan appeared relaxed, almost off guard. Not the polished public version fans are used to seeing, but the quieter one, laughing easily, responding naturally, not performing. Shen Yue, on the other hand, looked surprised herself. Not startled, not uncomfortable, just genuinely caught in the moment. And that authenticity is what sent fans into chaos. Photos surfaced first. Blurry, unposed, clearly not staged. Then short clips followed. Nothing dramatic. No grand gestures. Just presence. Standing close. Talking softly. Smiling in a way that felt familiar, like muscle memory kicking in without permission. Within hours, the internet exploded. Fans weren't just shocked, they were confused in the best way. Because this wasn't a promotional stunt. There was no new drama announcement attached. No press release waiting at the end of the moment. It simply happened. And that made it powerful. What truly drove fans wild wasn't what Wang or Shen Yue did. It was how they did it. There was no hesitation. No awkward distance. No need to prove anything. They moved like two people who didn't need to think about how they looked together. That detail alone sparked endless discussion. Some fans said it felt like time folded in on itself. Like Meteor Garden never really ended, it just paused. Others said this version felt more real, more grounded. Less youthful fantasy, more quiet understanding. And then came the reactions. Dylan, known for his playful confidence, seemed unusually calm afterward. No teasing posts. No cryptic messages. Just silence. Shen Yue did the same. No explanations. No clarifications. Just a return to normal activity, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But fans knew better. Because when something is truly ordinary, people don't react this strongly. And when something is truly extraordinary, the people involved don't always feel the need to explain it. Theories flooded timelines. Some thought it was coincidence. Others believed it was intentional but private. Many landed somewhere in between, believing that whatever this moment was, it wasn't meant for the public, but the public happened to witness it anyway. What stood out most was how protective fans became. Instead of demanding answers, many urged others to slow down, to respect the silence, to let the moment be what it was without tearing it apart. That response alone showed how deeply Wang and Shen Yue still matter together. Industry insiders later hinted that the encounter wasn't planned weeks in advance. It wasn't coordinated by teams. It was a crossing of paths that simply happened. And maybe that's why it felt so real. Because there was no time to prepare masks. Just two people meeting again in a space neither expected. As days passed, the story didn't fade. It evolved. Fans rewatched old interviews, old behind-the-scenes clips. They noticed patterns they hadn't paid attention to before. The way Dylan always softened around Shen Yue. The way Shen Yue never needed to compete for attention when standing beside him. It made people wonder not about romance alone, but about connection. About shared history. About bonds that don't disappear just because time moves forward. And that's why fans went wild. Not because they were given a fairy tale ending. Not because anything was confirmed. But because they were reminded of something unfinished. Something honest. Something that didn't need a script. And as long as Wang and Shen Yue continue to exist in the same world, whether together or apart, fans know one thing for sure. No matter how unexpected the moment is, no matter how quiet it appears on the surface, the story is never truly over. After that night, the ripple effect only grew stronger. What surprised many wasn't just how quickly the moment went viral, but how long it stayed alive in people's minds. Days passed, then weeks, and still, Dylan Wang and Shen Yue were trending, not because of new sightings, but because fans couldn't stop revisiting what they had already seen. What made it so powerful was the restraint. Neither of them tried to steer the narrative. No late-night posts, no playful denials, no subtle confirmations disguised as jokes. They let the moment exist exactly as it happened, untouched. And in doing so, they allowed fans to sit with their own emotions instead of chasing answers. People began to talk about how rare that felt. In past years, any unexpected interaction between popular stars would be immediately packaged into content, interviews, follow-ups, explanations. This time, there was nothing. Just silence. And that silence felt intentional, almost respectful. As if Dylan and Shen Yue both understood that some moments lose their meaning the second you try to explain them. Behind the scenes, those close to them noticed changes. Dylan became more selective with public appearances. He still smiled, still joked, but there was a new calmness about him. Less performative, more grounded. Shen Yue, meanwhile, seemed lighter in interviews, more assured. She spoke about her work with confidence, but fans noticed how often she mentioned growth, timing, and trust, words that hadn't dominated her conversations before. Fans connected the dots, even if they didn't try to force a conclusion. There were whispers that the two had briefly crossed paths before this moment, quietly and without attention. Nothing confirmed, nothing denied. Just enough ambiguity to make people believe that what fans witnessed wasn't the beginning, but a continuation. And that idea changed everything. Because if this wasn't a starting point, then it meant there was history beneath the surface. Not just shared fame, but shared pressure. Shared expectations. Shared memories of being young, suddenly famous, and forever linked by a single role that changed both their lives. Meteor Garden had given them visibility, but time had given them perspective. Fans began to say that this version of Dylan and Shen Yue felt more real than ever before. Not caught in character, not trying to recreate nostalgia, but meeting each other as adults who had grown separately and now understood each other better because of it. There was also a noticeable shift in how fans spoke about them. The tone softened, less demanding, more protective. People started reminding each other that whatever this was, it belonged to Dylan and Shen Yue first, not the internet. That collective maturity was unexpected, and it spoke volumes about how deeply fans respected them. Then came the subtle moments that reignited the conversation all over again. A familiar song Dylan referenced in passing. A phrase Shen Yue used that fans remembered from years ago. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they felt intentional. Or maybe not. And that uncertainty was exactly what kept people watching. What made this story crazy wasn't scandal or shock. It was the emotional whiplash of realizing that some connections don't expire. They evolve. They quiet down. They wait. And when they resurface unexpectedly, without warning, they hit harder than anything planned ever could. Even now, fans aren't asking for confirmation. They're asking for honesty. Not spoken honesty, but lived honesty. They want Dylan and Shen Yue to do what they've always done best, be themselves, without pressure. Because that night reminded everyone of something simple but powerful. Some stories don't need to be rewritten. They just need time to breathe. And when the moment is right, they find their way back into the spotlight. Not because they were chasing it, but because they were never truly gone. As the weeks stretched on, the story settled into something deeper than shock or nostalgia. It became a quiet conversation running underneath everything else Dylan Wang and Shen Yue did. Every new appearance, every interview, every casual mention was viewed through a different lens, not because fans were hunting for proof, but because they were listening more closely. What stood out most was how neither of them seemed uncomfortable with the attention, yet neither leaned into it. Dylan continued with his work, focused and disciplined, but fans noticed how he spoke differently about timing and patience. He joked less about what-ifs and talked more about when things feel right. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't pointed. But it felt reflective. Shen Yue, too, carried herself with a calm confidence that fans hadn't seen in a long time. She smiled easily, answered questions thoughtfully, and didn't rush through emotional topics. When asked about past experiences, she didn't dismiss them or romanticize them. She acknowledged them as meaningful chapters, closed, but not forgotten. That honesty resonated. People began to say this wasn't a reunion story. It was a maturity story. Two people who had grown into themselves separately, now capable of standing in the same space without tension, without expectation. And that, to many fans, felt even more powerful than a dramatic confirmation ever could. There were moments when fans thought the conversation would finally fade. A few days of silence, new headlines pushing new pairings, but then something small would happen again. A shared schedule overlap, a familiar setting, a brief interaction caught at the edge of a frame. Nothing definitive, just enough to remind everyone that this story wasn't finished being felt. What made it unexpected wasn't just the encounter, it was the emotional response it unlocked. Fans revisited their own memories of first watching Meteor Garden, where they were in life then, how much they had changed. Dylan and Shen Yue became symbols of that growth, reflections of a time that had passed but still mattered. Older fans spoke about closure. Younger fans talked about discovery. And somewhere in the middle, people simply appreciated the humanity of it all. No one was pretending this was simple. Shared history never is. But there was something comforting in seeing two people navigate that history with grace instead of chaos, with boundaries instead of spectacle. Industry observers even noted how rare this approach was. In an era driven by viral moments and constant visibility, Wang and Shen Yue allowed silence to do the work. They didn't correct assumptions or feed fantasies. They trusted time and their audience. That trust changed the tone of everything. Instead of pressure, there was patience. Instead of demands, there was respect. And in that space, the story became less about what happened and more about what it meant. It meant that some connections don't disappear when the cameras stop. It meant that growth doesn't erase shared beginnings. It meant that meeting again doesn't always require answers. Sometimes it's enough to acknowledge the moment and let it pass. And yet, even as the story softened, it didn't lose its power. Because fans understood something now that they didn't before. This wasn't about rekindling the past. It was about recognizing it without fear, without regret. And that recognition, quiet and unspoken, is why the story of Wang and Shen Yue still feels unfinished in the best possible way. Not waiting for a headline, not chasing a reveal, just existing, unexpected, unplanned, and impossible to ignore.